I know this from past experience. And then it will switch to live at some point, but it records from the moment you hit it, and then it goes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, oh, there
And
you
now
go.
it's
So it's live
live.
now.
Now it's official. But yeah.
All right. Well, anyone who hasn't come on yet, obviously we'll post this on the Substack for people to watch later. But for people who are watching and soon to be watching on the replay, my name is Adam Coleman. Obviously, you're a subscriber if you're probably getting an email letting you know. This is something new, just testing out with Katherine. I threw out in the chat, should I do a live stream? Which is something I rarely ever do. And you guys said yes, so due to popular demand, we are here.
The people
So I
should
want
have what they want, right?
give them what they want.
Yeah.
So the first guest I have here is Katherine. Katherine, I've never really said this to Katherine, but out of I've done a whole bunch of interviews, a bunch of different podcasts and stuff. Katherine is, I would say, my top 5, maybe even top 3 conversations I've had as an interviewer, and just like a really warm person where we could have like a really genuine conversation with each other. So,
Thank you.
Katherine,
I'm
yeah.
pleased to hear this. I mean, I wanted the number one spot. But I just literally did a stream about building your own cult. So my ego is like top notch. We'll get
Exactly.
there eventually. It's all good.
Yes. So for people who may not be familiar with you, unfortunately, why don't you tell more about yourself?
Yeah, it's deeply unfortunate for them for I'm still in the cult. It is deeply unfortunate for them that they don't know who I am. No, but in all seriousness, aside of having a big ego, I'm a writer, which I think you have to be have a bit of an ego to be a writer. I started in more like on the pop culture side of things, and technology, travel, that kind of stuff, and then moved into as sort of life events unfolded in our world, started becoming more of an advocate for free speech and free expression and exchange of ideas, and moved into commenting a bit more on politics, although I don't view myself as being particularly political as much as it is, I think, social commentary. And I think,
Mhm.
certain things affect us all, as opposed to focusing on maybe commenting on like a particular politician or necessarily all knowing all the bills that are being passed or things like that. I'm also Canadian, so apologies for that. Um, which is ironic that I just said that, because my book that I wrote, which was about cancel culture and free expression, and is called No Apologies: How to Find and Free Your Voice in the Age of Outrage. So this is definitely a topic I'm quite interested in. I've been also talking a lot about AI and how that's affecting us. And I have a podcast and a Substack here where I write essays about the world and our role in it, essentially on all sorts of topics, and just looking at things not from an ideological perspective. Um, though, I do tend to lean more liberal, but I think it's important for us to look at each thing, individually, and then go from there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was trying to think. I think I first came across you on Twitter. Um, yeah, I'm pretty sure I first came across you on Twitter. And one of the things I like about following you is that you're very similar to me, where you're not always latching on to the thing of the moment. You're more so, or at least in my perspective, what I catch is like you're asking questions about the reactions to the thing of the moment, which is different. Um, you're noticing people are upset about this. So what's causing them to be upset about this? Or there's something leading them in that direction, or the group think, even if they're right about what they're talking about, how come all these people are thinking the same exact thing and coming to the same exact conclusion, but they're not looking at this thing? Um, so that's one of those things that I noticed about you. And unlike some people who are asking questions,
Yeah. Like I really want to
um,
know the answer. I'm not actually
yeah,
trying to like make a statement by asking the question. Yeah, that's
right,
so true. It's
right.
got such a bad rap, the just asking questions thing, which I used to, because people would sometimes accuse me of that, and I didn't understand why people were so upset. And I kind of get it now because I've now come across a lot of the just asking questions types, and it's like, okay, that is not that is not the kind of they're not really curious, right? They're not motivated by curiosity when they're asking these questions, and that's really the significant difference. And I would say the other thing, and this is kind of a similarity with us, is I think we're very not attracted by the radicals of either side. So I know you're more conservative than me, but you have this like common sense about you.
Mhm.
So you're not like you're thinking through that stuff like very logically and factually, and you're not afraid to call out behavior on that side where it's like doesn't fit with your principles. And I think, and for me, it's kind of been the same. A little bit more calling out the left
Yeah.
earlier on. Now I'm like disillusioned with everyone. So basically, I'll be honest. I'm now a bitter person. Thanks, Twitter. I'll never call it
um,
X. No, I'm
so
kidding.
would you, yeah, I still call it Twitter. Would you say that you're more, I guess the term they use is politically homeless? Do you feel that kind of way?
Yeah, I mean, I think my principles would align with a more liberal worldview.
Hmm.
So that's to me is like maximizing individual freedom. I don't really judge people for making choices for themselves. Like, I was walking with someone who's a lot more conservative than me, and it just struck me that, we saw this man with this like giant earring in his ear, and it was just stretching it out. And it didn't look, neither of us appreciated the aesthetics of it. But I think the difference in my view and his is that for him, it was just something that really annoyed him, really rubbed him the wrong way, really very judgmental of it. Whereas for me, it's like, okay, I don't like it. So I would say that's kind of where I'm at. But
Mm.
in terms of politically, in terms of having a tribe, yeah, I don't feel like I have a tribe. And again, because some of my thoughts, they align, I'll probably agree with people who are conservative on some things and other things, even progressive. Like I have some viewpoints, like prison reform would be an example, or healthcare, where I'm a
Hmm.
little bit more on that side, or even like socialist in some way. So I hate the fact that we're having to, you know, fit conveniently into one thing or the other. And I get it when we go to vote, yeah, you got to have to make a choice. But in terms of individual stances on things, I don't think you have to fit so comfortably in. And I think we're pushed to make those kinds of decisions.
I agree with you. For example, I don't think I've ever called myself publicly conservative.
Mhm.
Everyone else calls me conservative, but I've never called myself that. As a matter of fact, the only thing that I've stuck to label wise is independent. And I correct people. Like if they call me conservative, I don't correct them, whether they're right or
Mhm.
wrong. That's their perspective. But if they call me a Republican, I say, no, I'm independent. Right. That's the one area because people like to, make judgments based off of political party, but I have no allegiance. I see stupid stuff happen on the political right as well as the political left. Neither side is wholly right or wholly wrong. Um, and it's very interesting to me because there are a lot of things I'm pretty liberal on. So much of what you said, like the guy with the thing in his ear,
Mhm.
those people were my friends. I wrote a piece quite some time ago, the way we talk about, the left and, oh, they look weird. They got the multicolored here. Um, I just heard myself. Oh, okay. That was weird. um,
And I got
yeah.
a call, so from a
Oh, okay.
telemarketer. So
There you go. Um, they're like, oh, they look strange. They got multicolored hair. But those were my friends. I was friends with the goth kids. I had bleached hair. So that type of stuff doesn't bother me. Matter of fact, when I see some of these kids who are struggling to find themselves and find identity, and they're choosing an alternative lifestyle. I see some tragedy within them because I know, like many of my friends, were consuming substances because they were having issues at home. Um, I have a friend who overdosed and died. Um, and I think he was like in his very early 30s. He might have been 30 when he passed. Um, and he went to rehab when he was 16 because of abuse at home. But like if you looked at him, you're like, he's wearing chains, he's wearing all black and stuff like that. But he's the nicest guy in the world, you know? Um, and
Do you
he'd
think
give you
that for
anything.
you? Do you think
Yeah.
that for you, because you were exposed to all sorts of people growing up and you had, your own struggles, I know a little bit about,
Mhm.
is that something that gives you the sense of, just understanding of people without having to necessarily judge them as this is what they are because this is how they look or present?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm less judgmental because one, I know what it's like to be prejudged,
Mhm.
and called names, and you know, assumed, like we talked about, when you're black and you speak a particular way, oh, you want to be this, or if you dress a particular way, if you date outside your race, you hate being black. It's you all these the prejudgment about every little aspect of your life simply because you just happen to look a particular way. Same way, you can't think a particular way because you look this way. And I see for many of the leftist types where I don't agree with what they're saying, but I think for many of them, I understand why they're gravitating towards this because they haven't been given an alternative option that's at least appealed to them, or gives them a sense of community. I knew people who used to protest, but they would just protest just to protest. Just like, are you going to the next protest? Like it was, and I was like, why are they so?
I'm
Because
too
if
lazy, so I don't get into
yeah,
those things, just literally because I'm too lazy to go. But I can understand how like you're in a crowd and maybe you're protesting for something that you do have an emotional feeling about, and then other people and you're together, like you could see how that could be appealing to people in a really tribal kind of way, which has naturally been the case for many years for people.
yeah,
And it's MAGA. I never know how to pronounce it even, to be honest, but I don't think it's that different. Like, I think that MAGA for a lot of people is kind of a tribe in the same way of like a community. And so, you see people put it on their profiles, for example. To me, that's like an indication of you want to be recognized as being part of this group. And and,
right,
and it's the same thing with, BLM or something like that, or blue whale. Like, when people put these things in, they're like indicators. They're also like a safety thing. One of the people I interviewed in my book, I thought that was a really interesting point that she made, that, a lot of people will put some of these signals in their bios, for example, to just outwardly signal to people, this is what I believe, this is who I am, and just leave me alone, kind of thing, right? And if you believe in the same, come in, but or you're okay with it, you're welcome. But like, but it's like you don't have to discover that this is my belief over time and then attack me for it. Like, this is my protective, layer, all these labels in a way.
right. I just want to read. Noam said, we've had these conversations about avatar culture and social media turning our kids into, was it Satoshis? Um, yeah, I think I think much of what you said, it's you're sending a signal. There's a reason. I tell people this all the time. Everyone does everything for a particular reason, right? They might not say it, but you're not robots. So whether you decide to get up and take a shower first or go get something to eat, well, why did you choose one or the other, right? There's a reason why we're doing everything that we do. And the reason for putting that in the bio is the same reason why I won't put that in my bio, is because I don't want to let people know what is inside my head. I don't want to send a signal out there and have people assume what I believe based off of that. But many people do. They want to identify their tribe, and at the same rate, they want to know, like when they see someone say something wild and crazy, if they click on it and it says blue wave, then they know, ah, this person is part of this tribe, and I can already surmise everything that they think. And unfortunately, most of the time, you probably can't.
Well,
Right?
avatar culture, I mean, that was a good point. The person who posted that, I found it at times really sad and frustrating because I think for me, because what I had in my bio was, I used to have my publications that have been published
Hmm.
in my bio because I'm a journalist. And those were, for example, The Guardian or the Washington Post. I've had some of those variety. And to people that signaled that I am this like hardcore leftist who's like part of the lying media machine, and so they would attack me a lot, quite with a lot of hostility, without really understanding who I am, what I think, because I've never, even when I was more part of that, published this kind of stuff. I didn't publish things that were like attacking anybody. I wasn't publishing political content at all. And so, and I, my beliefs haven't shifted that much. Like I'm more outspoken now, but I've
Hmm.
always been pretty open to conversing with people who don't necessarily believe the same things that I do. And I've always advocated for that. So, like, I haven't even shifted, but people would make these assumptions about me that, that I believe this, and this, and they get a lot of it wrong, like a lot. And
Yeah.
but they would like come at me, but they weren't coming at me, they were coming at my avatar. And it still kind of made me sad at times, but I understood that it wasn't really personal so much. But this is what happens. We talk across each other, we talk to our avatars because you talk to an image you've created of that person, and that's all you have of them unless you've really taken the time to like follow them for a while. And if you perceive them as the enemy, you're not going to follow them for a while. I have some followers where they have like sort of turned around because they got to know me better,
Yeah.
but that takes a very kind of patient person, I think, or somebody quite open to do that. So yeah.
Yeah. I've had people, so a couple things. This was years ago. I had spoken for Turning Point's Faith. They invited me out to speak at a church. Um, and someone, let me tell you, one of my pet peeves is when people try to drag me into stuff. It doesn't happen as much these days, but and if they try, I usually don't see it. But it used to happen a lot more years ago. And they're like, Adam, check this person out. I'm like, I don't care. This is between you two.
Yeah.
But they tried dragging me in, and they were arguing with some leftists, and they were like, "This is the guy. He spoke for the white supremacist turning points." And so I said to them, "Do you know why I was speaking at Turning Points? I was talking about the importance of fathers in children's lives. Do you disagree with that?" They never answered me.
Well,
So,
there's this segregation, right? Like, you're kind of not allowed to go across. Like, I even find that I still have that in the back of my mind sometimes, right? Where
mhm,
I'll talk to individuals, but I'm a little bit more like cautious about entire political groups, for example. And
mhm,
and part of that, like, if I really stop to think about it, I'm like, well, why shouldn't I speak to them just because they're different? Um, I don't want to be used though. Like, so I think sometimes it's a fear of being like, oh, look, this liberal believes the left is bad and she's willing to say that. And I don't want to be used in that way
mhm.
politically. But other than that, like if it's just about having a conversation that's open, um, what's wrong with that? Why shouldn't people sort of cross aisles? Why is this even an aisle thing? And it's hard to escape that mindset though sometimes. Like I'm a little bit ashamed at times that I'm like definitely think that way.
Yeah. It's I mean, it's unfortunate. I think the part for me that always gives me hesitancy is one simple thing. I don't care if people disagree with me or not. There may be things we might talk about in a minute that we don't see eye to eye on. Um, what I care about is, are we having a good faith conversation or not? Because if we're not, I don't have time for this. I don't care to prove that I'm right. Or, I don't. I have no ego when it comes to stuff like this. So I'll just leave. Like I did that over the weekend. I was like, you know what? It's Saturday. I kind of feel like doing other stuff. Enjoy your weekend. I'm out. Like mute the thread. Just move on. Um, and so because especially in the online world, everyone is on attack all the time, and so I just speak to people respectfully. But if I see that they're trying to use setup things like, Adam, you're smarter than that, stuff
Mm.
like that. And I'm just like, you know what? Cut the bullshit. Like, stop the condescending stuff. I see where this is going. I'm not
Even
dumb.
with comment sections, I was listening to a podcast interview today and I read the comment and I knew as soon as I saw what the topic was, I knew that the comment section was going to look exactly like I expected, but it was still a bit upsetting. But I'm reading this and it's like, the people aren't engaging with the ideas of what that person says, which is fine. Like totally fair to criticize. Maybe they're even
Mhm,
right, but it was all like condescending or making fun of the person or being this superior. That's really bad faith commenting,
mhm,
and it's just like because they don't know maybe how to vocalize their disagreements sometimes, but also because it's about it's the person that they dislike immediately because they have a different worldview. Um, it's just, I mean, that episode, I can see why people would have different views on that, right? Like, I don't think it's such a, um, I mean, it was a trigonometry episode actually, and
mhm.
if you follow that podcast, and the person who was on it was a former porn star, so I can see why they would have different maybe disagreements with what she said, but instead of verbalizing these disagreements as in like this is what she says, this is what I disagree with, it was like personal attacks on her as a person because of some choices that she's made. That kind of thing doesn't sit so well with me.
Yeah,
But and then with the, when the conversation is not good faith, I don't really see the point of it. Uh, you can't verbalize very well what it is that the point you're trying to make. You don't get to test ideas. You don't get to learn because the person isn't giving you like good arguments, right? Because they're just being bad faith. Their arguments aren't unfair arguments. Like if I'm having a conversation with someone I disagree with, it's like I want to learn. I want to test my own perspective, and I also want to learn from them because maybe they have some information or a a take on it that I haven't thought of. But then I don't have any benefit if that person is just going to be bad faith. But unfortunately, a lot of conversations are set up to be either bad faith or like really debates about winning and losing.
yeah,
I think we all lose when that's the case.
yeah. I will say that there tends to be, like you said, it's about winning and losing. But I think the other part is, especially within politics, and I would even go down to religion. A lot of people are born and raised a particular way, and they've always been that way their entire life. Their family thinks the same way. They were raised by their family. If they were all Democrats, they were raised Democrat. They all believe the same thing. And this is their perspective. Everyone around them thinks the same way, and so there's comfortability. And so, of course, I'm right. Everyone around me agrees I'm right. And so I'll just give like from my personal perspective, as someone who's a former Democrat and someone who is now an independent and understands the political right far more than I did years ago, there are many things that I realized that I was wrong or misinformed on, right? It's the humility to say, I was wrong about some things. And I'm willing to say that publicly that I was wrong. But for a lot of people, they don't know what it's like to not be right, right? Or at least to say, to humble themselves and say, the thoughts that I had before were actually incorrect, or they were misleading thoughts that I had, or it was fueled by ego, or whatever it might be. And the same thing I've noticed when it comes to someone who is a born again Christian. There is an element, and obviously not every Christian, but there is an element of Christians who were born, always raised Christian, always had faith, always in the scripture, always this. And at one point, they want more people to join the faith, but at another point, you're a baby Christian. Oh, we got to treat you differently. Oh, you need time to do that. They, you're treated differently. And we're supposed to give people grace. Like, I don't know which episode of Trigonometry that was, or who the former porn star is, but I've seen instances of former OnlyFans girls or former porn stars coming to Christ. And that should be a win for Jesus, right? But then they turn that into, well, somehow that's a negative because she didn't always make the right choice throughout her entire life. And so they can't understand what it's like to struggle, to have faith. I was agnostic for well, probably a large part of my life. And they don't know what it's like to be won over and challenge yourself and things like that and question these things to finally come to that. And so, I have an article this titled, "Do you take Jesus for granted?" For that very reason, you always had Jesus, right? You always believed he was always there. But for me, I had to work, and now I don't take it for granted. Um, and I do see an element of Puritanism, where I was always right, but are you the pure blood? I know you just came around, but we were always there. So we have this hierarchy about ourselves because we were always this way. Welcome to the club. It's that kind of egotism. So I don't know if you've seen that
I
element
think
too.
that's all. Oh yeah, absolutely. I think I might have even written something about that. It's Puritanism. It's both on the left and the right in terms of the
Yeah.
tribes, because it's a purity test. Whether on the left, it's like, do you use the right words?
Hmm.
Do you care enough about minorities? That kind of thing. That's the same kind of idea as the purity test. And then on the right, yeah, it's like, are you religious enough? Have you dated too many, have you been with too many men, or whatever the criteria is? Are you Christian enough? Are you,
Right.
in some cases? So it's all about that. And ultimately it's about this. It comes from the sense of self-righteousness, right? It's this
Yeah.
idea that I know better, and you need to be as good, and you're not. If you don't do what we do, you're not a good person.
Mm.
Which is kind of absurd because people don't do the same things for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's their lives are like that. They have issues. Sometimes they just don't see the world the same way.
Mm.
But yeah, but that's kind of the problem with it. And I think people's beliefs are just incredibly difficult to overcome for several reasons. One is, if you're in a tribe, your whole environment is all your friends are maybe and have the same belief. And so changing it means losing a lot, right? And losing your community. And I think that's
Hmm.
incredibly difficult for people. So if they have that
Yeah.
doubt, and the other thing is they can be so attached to that belief on an emotional level that it's the only way that I've seen. It's very rare for people to dramatically change their minds. And when I've kind of looked into it, like a lot of it has to do with some kind of a personal experience more than facts and logic. You're not going to really convince somebody. I looked at it in the context of even like, okay, why do actual white supremacists, right? So let's say KKK members, why do
Hmm.
they leave the Klan? And the reason that they leave the clan is usually some personal experience where they see things differently. But it's not going to happen just because somebody told them, well, it's not very good to be racist against people, right? And it's
Right.
the same as cults, right? Cults, there's a reason, there's certain conditions that why people end up being susceptible, and they're not always, it's not because they're always dumb or bad people or anything like that. It's certain conditions in their lives, and that there's groups that pry on that, and it's the same with the KKK, and other organizations like that. And then they become part of this community, and they get
Hmm.
isolated also, and they were already probably isolated to begin with. Now they're isolated from the outside world, but they rely so much on this group, their community, and now leaving is, is terrifying because they rely on it. And so they even suppress, I think they suppress doubt, I think. And it's the same thing with, like, mind traps, as I call them. So these beliefs that we have, and sometimes they're ridiculous beliefs, but we often choose not to, even if we have a little bit of doubt, we choose not to change our mind because we choose not to think about it even. There is this reactionary way when that's suggested to us, when people push back, because by changing that belief, we lose so much, right? We lose the idea of who we are, we lose the
Hmm.
community, we get rejected. So it's inconvenient. And so the cost of that is so high, of changing your mind, that people rarely do unless they have that, like, dramatic personal experience.
Yes. I usually refer to it as a clash of a contradiction. Um, let's say you're a KKK member, uh, and you're in some burning house, and the person who saved your life is black. It's kind of like, huh, it makes you think.
Hmm.
Or Daryl Davis is a perfect example. He embedded himself in their life, and they saw how he was such a good man, and he doesn't look like me. And it's that question of themselves, like, does this rhetoric make sense? Is this bullshit? That kind of thing.
I was
Um,
thinking about him, obviously, as I was talking, but even just recently, because I was thinking about the people he was able to sort of get out of the KKK. I think the fact that they had already talked to him in the first place, they showed a curiosity.
yeah,
That curiosity meant that they were a little bit more open than maybe other people were, within those groups. And so I think that made it more possible, but it's pretty rare. I mean, he's had, I don't remember how many hoods he's collected, like 50 or something, which is remarkable in a way, but it's still such a small number ultimately. And I
yeah.
think about him a lot in terms of my own approach, because I'm like, does it, you know, is one person enough? Do I talk to this one person and put my time into it? And sometimes it's possible. It shows you that it is possible, but also, how do we scale that, I guess? Can we even do that?
It's difficult. Ian said it's an
Oh,
indisputable
200.
cognitive dissonance. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
and he said it's 200, so maybe it's
200.
200. That's huge. That's more, way more than I realized, I think.
Yeah.
But still, yeah.
So I actually want to pivot a little bit because we were bringing up, I don't know if people are aware, but Donald Trump is president again, and he's been doing some stuff.
Wait, what? What do you mean?
Surprise! He left The
Are
Apprentice,
you serious?
and um,
I thought that was in my
and
dream nightmare.
no,
Okay.
no, not this time. He's back. But
He's
this time
back.
he is going all in on illegal immigration. That's right, Natalie. He is the president. Natalie is down under, and
They don't get the
she's
news though.
she doesn't
They
get.
get it
It
low
takes like a
late.
yeah, it takes like 2 weeks to find out what's going on the other side of the planet.
Yeah.
Um, but Trump is all in on illegal immigration and
He's into
deportations.
it. Yeah.
He's
Oh,
very much
oh,
so
you
into
mean,
it.
okay, he's not into it. But
Not
you
like
did
it's his
say all
kink.
in. I'm sorry, I had to. I couldn't help myself. I had to.
um, So actually, because you mentioned that you're Canadian, but are you living in the States or because you're
I've
all over
lived
the
in the
world?
States. I've lived all over. I'm currently not in the States, but I have lived in New York, and some other places, but mostly New York in the States.
Okay.
I do have opinions about immigration, which it's interesting because I think people can be. Somebody posted, probably a mutual of ours, posted like uh, it was like a letter, very kind of sob story about somebody say to his friend, I love you, I might get arrested, something like that. It looked like it was a
Hmm.
child. And the other person, whose name I'm currently missing from my mind, he commented of something about empathy, that it's people with empathy, like overly empathetic people should never be in charge, and that it's not sad. And I'm like, well, it is, right? I think you can hold two ideas in your head at the same time. One being that, okay, a country has the right to enforce legal immigration,
Hmm.
and two, that people who choose to come illegally, although I guess they're undocumented technically, people who choose to apply for asylum are not necessarily doing it always because if I lived in certain circumstances, that's what I would want to do. And you can have empathy for that, and especially for a child who didn't necessarily even make that choice themselves. It's their parents' choice, and all they've ever known is that they grew up in the US, they speak English, all their friends are there, they don't know the country that they're might be sent back to. I had a lot of empathy, and to me, I even supported. I guess I would have supported the Dreamers Act, which might not go over well with some listeners, but at the same time, I also understand that you don't, that can be used to take advantage of a country's immigration system. So, if parents bring it incentivizes bringing, giving birth in the U.S. and it's hard to reconcile the two things in some ways, and the policies, have to punish somebody after the fact doesn't seem right to me. But to have this law enforced now, maybe that makes a bit more sense for people who might want to do this now, as opposed to having already gotten away with it. I don't know. You probably have other thoughts on that.
So, um, there's I have a lot to say. I've been tweeting a lot and writing articles a lot. So there's so many different areas I can come with. What I will say is I'm empathetic. I'm probably more empathetic to the situation of a lot of illegal immigrants and what they're dealing with. Just so people understand, we're specifically talking about illegal immigration. This is not a immigration discussion. That's
Although
something.
interestingly enough, I found it because I thought that people more on the right were like just against illegal immigration, where,
Mhm,
whereas I've discovered, at least my impression now through Twitter, is that a lot of people, especially with that whole H-1B debacle, it seemed to me a lot of people expressed like they want no immigration. It's a mixed like bag because I think some people are totally fine with legal immigration, who are more on the right, and
mhm.
there's also a big chunk of people who just want no immigration, um, or very, very, very minimal immigration. And also to clarify, when we talk about illegal immigration, that includes people who are, so it's people who are applying for asylum essentially at the border. And some of these people have perhaps a legitimate basis for their claims, and other people do not. And they just get let in, and I guess the system is so overran that they take so long to process any of that people could be living for years and getting financial support. So that seems to be a problem. And having talked to someone or attended a lecture by someone who specifically looks at asylum, My understanding is, and please, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding
Mhm.
is that there are some people that the system is failing to prioritize people based on their actual need. So a lot of the people who are getting in aren't necessarily people who should be getting in because they're not in need in the way that, and other people who really are in legitimate need because of risks to their lives are not necessarily getting in. So
Yeah.
that's my understanding.
Yeah, I've never had the impression that our immigration system is working perfectly. Obviously, I'm not an immigration lawyer. I don't work in the immigration system, but that's not been the impression that I've got. I understand from other immigrants how difficult it is to try to come into the States, which is
Very
not necessarily a bad thing. Um, especially if you're talking about long term, not necessarily like, student visa or something like that. But if you're talking about long term uh, residency, things of that nature, or work visas and things like that, I can understand where there's some difficulty. They want to check your background and where you're coming from. I think the issue that we face, especially during the Biden administration, was that there's a process to if you have a legitimate refugee claim, there's a process. And that process doesn't include you just showing up at the doorstep and saying, I'm a refugee. The process is that you apply and then you get some sort of approval. Then you can come in because you've gotten some sort of approval because you've gone through all these steps. Um, I don't obviously I don't know if there's like some sort of emergency type of thing, but what was happening is it was like an exploit, right? Um, if you come here, say that you're a refugee, you can stay here, and then you'll just wait your court date out. But that is it's a massive mistake to do something like that because you're one adult. All right, now what do you do? Because your court case isn't for another 2 years. So what do you do now that you're in this foreign country? How are you going to eat? What are you going to do? All right, so now the government is taking it upon themselves to take care of you. Okay, so you mean I can show up, I can wait around for 2 years, someone feeds me and shelters me. I'm not saying it's the best situation, but someone feeds me, shelters me, and I might have a possibility of staying. Or maybe I can work under the table and do DoorDash or something like that. That seems to be a deviation as to what we've always done. But I see the major flaw with you come here and you stay here until you go to court, which is another thing. Does everyone always show up in court? Are they keeping track of where people are? Like it just becomes a huge mess to manage people. But I think that's more of a procedural thing. I think my part of my issue is I see the exploitation happening and I see the unfairness happening as far as what's happening for American citizens because they're being the illegal labor. See, for me, it's not a legal immigration thing. Like I know people are talking about H-1B and all this other stuff. But we have work visas to fill certain jobs if we can't fill it for whatever reason. I'm fine with that because there may be some people in certain locations, not enough people to fill it. And you want to bring someone from the outside, this is a legal process. You bring them in, and you know what that means? They have legal protections as a worker. But what
mm,
I've seen is illegal workers being brought in and being taken advantage of. I've seen illegal workers being brought in and committing all different types of identity fraud. Um, I used to, let's just say, I used to consult for different different types of warehouses throughout New Jersey. I know you were in New York. I don't know how much time you spent in New Jersey,
not that
but
much.
we not to,
Like a typical snooty New Yorker.
you're like not over there.
No.
Uh, but New Jersey is fascinating in some ways because we're often forgotten about. But there's a massive Hispanic population that's here, and we have like Hispanic enclaves. So unless you go to those places for a particular reason, which would be like you live there, basically, um, there's no reason, and you may not even know. So when I worked for these companies, they were always set up in a Hispanic dominated neighborhood. And so, like Perth Amboy, you go there, stores are in Spanish, everything's in Spanish, you see nothing but Hispanic people, right? Newark, it's in the part of town where there's more Hispanic people. It, like all the way from North Jersey to South Jersey. And then we would have clients where they would have certain people go inside the warehouse and stay there to help the people. So it'd be 30 people that they bring in for the day. And I would see how they operated. And I'm watching step by step how this all works. They give identification. They're looking for a job. They're technically hired for the day through a middleman company, like a staffing agency.
Mm.
The staffing agency says, you're going to be working here. So they pick them up the next day and they bring them because they don't have a license. So they bring them to the location. They work there technically for the day. Many of them come back the next day and the next day and next day, right? But they're always seen as contractors and they're not employed by the big brand because they're mainstream brands. I could tell you, I'm not saying them, publicly, but they're mainstream brands. I could tell you that I've been inside their warehouses. They're using illegal labor. They're skating around it because they're technically not employees. They don't do a W-2 and all this other stuff. It's technically going through a third-party company. But what I specifically was told that every company has a choice if they want to do e-verify. Most don't, and we know why. So what I'm seeing is very blatantly illegal labor happening all throughout New Jersey in factories, warehouses, and we have a ton of them throughout North and South Jersey. And I'm just like, matter of fact, where I live at, down the street around the corner was one of our clients. There's a factory right there. They use illegal labor, and another one down the street. Like we have them all over the place. They're using illegal labor, and it's a massive, massive industry of doing so. And everyone is making money off of it. And
Do you
what,
think that
yeah,
the fact that the minimum wage is a certain set number, is that sort of
yes,
contributing? Okay. Yeah.
absolutely. Because we just increased it. So I think it was officially like last year or maybe the year before, because it was like 3 years in a row they were increasing the minimum wage until they hit 16. So we have a high minimum. I think Pennsylvania has $9. So there's that extra incentive. And the companies I'm telling you about would pay minimum wage. So they're being legal, so to speak, right? So it's all this, hey, we don't ask any questions. Hey, listen, we just asked for their ID. They gave it to us. We don't know that it's fraudulent.
Mm.
you know,
Wait,
it's
so they're paying minimum wage to people they know they're illegal. So do they do that because they can't find employees to work for minimum wage locally?
no.
So why
And
are they
that's
doing it?
because what they're finding, one, if their clients are willing to pay out X amount of dollars, right? Obviously, they take their cut. So if minimum wage is 16, let's say they say for every person you find us, we'll pay you $20, right? They pay the person minimum wage, they make the difference, something to that nature. But for this type of work, heck, if they're going to pay us that much, we could find a whole bunch of people really fast who will take minimum wage to do this work. And they're all in enclaves and they'll pop up to do this project and do this day work and stuff like that. It's just fast and easy. And they're not competing with, they're specifically not competing with mostly American workers. So I, all right, technically an American, because I've seen a few Black people who would come in and apply, right? It's very
Mm.
rare, but I would see some Black people who might come in and apply. Even rarer, might see a white person come in and apply. But they're catering to the Hispanic illegal immigrant population that's here. That everyone is bilingual. They have everything that's in English and Spanish. They're specifically targeting them. They're only in Hispanic neighborhoods. Like, so it's not by accident. It's not like they're just in one area that's highly mixed.
A good comment, just somebody said that they're not paying SSI and Medicare tax. So that's probably a part of the appeal. I'm just wondering, like, why can't the government, for example, like, work through this idea with me and tell me
Yeah,
if there's holes there? But, I was thinking, what if the government were to issue visas? So these same workers can come in legally, they'd be paid, whatever they've decided would be the industry rate to help, these companies work. They could then be there legally, pay taxes. I keep hearing that illegals pay taxes, so maybe that's true. I don't know. But they'd be there fully legally, tracked, and if they work for, X number of years, they would also have a pathway to apply for immigration. If they have a clean record, no criminal record, nothing like that. Um, wouldn't that be something that would fit both entities, both the U.S. and the immigrants, because it gives them a chance to not be having to hide, be illegal, and a potential pathway to citizenship for some of them who might want that?
yeah, absolutely. And I would be in favor of that. And we have that. We have work visas for people in specific industries that we were talking about
But
the
usually those are
H-1B.
hired. Yeah, those are usually like, right, like very skilled labor.
No,
The
it actually it doesn't have to be. Um, it can be a wide range of employers. Like people were going after this one podcast because they were looking for someone who does like basic work, and they just put a listing out there. It's basically just like a job board listing, and so technically it could be for anything. It could be for a cashier. It could be for anything.
But not
Um,
for, so wait, but H-1B visas are pretty, they're like, as somebody who's, tried to get, um, the only visa that's easy to get, and this is for Canadians specifically, is the TN visa if you're on the list of occupations that fit into that. The
yeah.
H-1B visa, is much more complicated, and there's like quotas that fill out. Like one time when I was trying to get one, it filled out before I even had a chance to apply.
Mhm.
So they're really not that easy to get, except for maybe some tech companies where they have an allotment and they have more freedom to get them, but they're not paying like low wages to people either. So I don't see a lot of opportunities for someone who's not like highly qualified, to get a visa for the US, to like a work visa, unless there's like some category that I'm just like unaware of.
I've heard of people, and I don't have firsthand experience with this, but this is what I've been told that border states, especially like places like Texas, they may have, actually, I'm pretty sure they have people who live in Mexico, but they are legally allowed to come over and work in the United States doing specific work. It's some sort of workplace agreement that I don't know if it's like some sort of visa program or something of that nature, or for maybe a specific industry within Texas. Um, but often when you hear people talk about the southern border is not safe, and you'll hear people say, "Listen, people are just trying to get to work." They're often talk about Mexican citizens who are trying to come here so they can work legally. They literally go back and forth. I actually met a doctor who lived in a border state, and he would talk about that. I'm not border state. He lived in Mexico, but on the border. That's where he grew up, and he would say, "Yeah, Mexicans come across all the time. Yeah, agricultural industry. Yeah, so they come across all the time, and they work, and they do that legally." I think what we're seeing is something different, though, because I think there's a narrative issue that we're facing, and I think it's a narrative issue that we've been facing for some time. It's the presumption that we need the illegal workers because there's not enough people who want to do the jobs, rather than um, the American worker is being undercut, and the areas like, for example, all these warehouses that are popping up around here, I don't think are by accident. These warehouses weren't here 20 years ago, right? So it's not, oh, well, there was nobody here to work it. And so we just had to bring, no, they popped up these warehouses. They immediately went to illegal labor, right? It
So the
was
idea being that if the even though the wage that they're paying is minimum wage, as you mentioned, you don't see a lot of white people or black people applying that are like American locals because that wage is still so significantly too small for them, that they're not applying for it. But had there not been a supply of this illegal labor, then the companies would have been forced to increase the wages to attract candidates. Is that the argument? Okay.
absolutely. And on top of that, the other point, as I'm talking to you, I'm like thinking all this stuff. The other point, I think it's really important. They're not being targeted. Um, for the jobs that I was just talking about, they have specific staffing agencies that are in specific areas. And and so if you are, let's say if you're uh, black and you're unemployed, and let's say you live in in a lower economic situation and you need a job, they're not catering to you. They're not in the black neighborhood. They're not trying to get you, right? And there are lots of people who are looking for a job. Um, there's a reason why they do day-to-day work, right? Because that particular population is kind of transient sometimes. And so, like, you can't have this be in that particular way. So, everything is very much so catered. I've even heard people say that they were specifically told, we're not hiring white people for this job. And I could understand why they're saying that because everyone in there is Hispanic and many of them don't speak English. Um,
Mm.
and it's this constant churn. It's kind of like they can churn through illegal immigrants and they can just run through the next bunch and they'll work at this place one day and then the next place another day. And so everyone's just running through this seemingly endless supply of workers. And the way I've been saying it is like, if you have a set amount of businesses in an area, right, and you have an employee pool of 1,000, right, so there's a level of scarcity that's involved and value. As a worker, your value based on how many people are in that worker pool. But if you add 50,000 people to that worker pool, your value as a worker goes down, right? You're not nearly as valuable because I can get rid of you and get somebody else to do the same type of job. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the devaluing of the American worker because of the prevalence of the illegal worker. Maybe 2, 3 decades ago, 10,000 people here, 10,000 people here trickle in. That's one thing. But I'm hearing estimates of 50 million illegal immigrants in this country, which may be high or maybe it's 20 million. I don't know. But we have, was it 330 million people in this country? That's a lot of people. And
I
so,
think what's difficult here is because I think it's a little more simple to say what we should do with the border. Okay. Like,
yeah,
I mean, I'm sure there are many disagreements there too, but it's a little more. Even I know the Democrats, are kind of realizing that situation isn't tenable, and we're trying
right.
to do something. So I think there is like a general agreement there, where I think it becomes difficult, and I think often emotional, is where it's like, okay, what do you do with the people who are already in the country, and one, adults, and two, children, in particular children were born there. And I think that's where it gets like very sticky and emotional for people and sometimes hysterical.
Yeah. Ian said regarding the 50,000 worker thing, like Adam said, it's not even just a matter of there being that many homogenized workers. There are many other variables that can affect the demand and supply, such as language barriers, skill set, fortitude, etc. Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
all that is true. Um, one thing I'll give like an anecdote. I was actually Twitter is a great place sometimes because you meet great people, um, and sometimes just regular people. And this guy reached out to me. He's in Mississippi, in central Mississippi, and he has a landscaping business and he's seen the illegal immigration usage and stuff like that, but he's also talked about He stays away from that because he's seen what happens when you get caught. Like they not only do they fine you, but he's seen people get put in handcuffs because of the use of illegal workforce. But he gave an example where he had a potential new client, and they were trying to say like, I'll manage the landscape. We need to have like a year-round workforce as far as keep track of it. And he was trying to pitch like, listen, we're in central Mississippi. Like you have a slew of either young people or poor people who just need a job that are like you have a workforce right here. And the guy said the board decided to get some immigrants to come through. And
Mm.
he thought that was strange. Like you have a workforce right here. Like you don't need to bring people from the outside. Um, so it's that type of mentality because where I think a lot of people who are having these arguments, just like he would say, like, I don't know what it's like to live in New Jersey or New York, right? He's from a rural area. But we often forget about these people who are in the rural areas and what they're experiencing. And their situation when it comes to legal immigration looks different than for me. The situation out here is warehouses and factories. Out there, it's agriculture,
Why
it's
is no one
landscaping.
going after these companies is something I don't understand. Like they
The
seem to
only
be the culprits of this and right? And it
in
doesn't
a
really get talked about
in a
in
big
that
way,
way.
yes. Yeah. In a big way, yes. The only thing I can come down to that makes sense to me is money because everyone is making money off of it because it's so plentiful, right? If I can just go and pick up a guy at Home Depot and just pay him a few bucks to do a job, okay, I don't have to pay employee tax, insurance. I don't have to pay any benefits. Not, oh, this is nice and easy. Why? Because I'm doing it the wrong way, the illegal way. And
Mhm.
so I think everyone is making money. Like the same factories that I see here, do they really need 30 people to do the job? No, but they can afford to get 30 people, and maybe that speeds up productivity, right? But they could probably do the same job with less people, But it's cheaper because they don't
Or
have to pay
AI.
insurance,
At some point,
or
it's going
yeah,
to be AI that's going to take out, I think, a lot of those kinds of jobs. Although probably not. Mm, certain things are actually really difficult for robots to do. So,
yeah,
like if they're picking fruits or something like that, that's not an easy thing for a machine to do. It's still going to be cheaper to have anything to do with farming being done by a real person. But I imagine that some of this, well, I think a few things are going to happen because AI is going to replace a whole bunch of jobs, which will leave certain people unemployed. So they're going
yeah,
to be wanting these jobs. And then if they're not getting access to them or they're being paid underpaid a wage that they can't live off of in the US or Canada, it's like that's a really serious issue. So
yeah.
imagine that's going to create more of a tension there. Um, but I guess would love to just hear what you think should happen with okay, so let's say we close the border or like limited, maybe set up some kind of better facility for people while they're being, considered so they don't have the incentive of that they're like, well, just by showing up at the border, they get to live in the US for X number of years on taxpayer dollars. Okay. So solve that, let's say. Easy. It was so easy. I did it.
Yeah.
But then, okay, but now you have a whole bunch of people already inside the country, like a pretty large number, a substantial number of people. What do you do with them? I think that's the most difficult part of it.
I guess the best analogy is imagine a guy who sells drugs in your neighborhood, right? Sells drugs and he gives money to people, he passes out turkeys on Thanksgiving, he does that whole thing. And he's never gotten in trouble, never been arrested. He's been doing it for 25, 30 years, never got in trouble. And then one day, cops show up and bust him and put him in jail. And you're like, he's been an upstanding guy. He's been doing this entire time. Why are you busting him now? It's like, but he knows what he's been doing from the very beginning was illegal. He just didn't get caught. And so
Mhm.
I have a hard time. I'm empathetic, but I have a hard time incentivizing bad behavior because that leads to a place that we don't want to go in a particular society. The failure, part of the problem that this falls on Trump's feet is that Trump is going to take the extreme position because things have actually been pretty extreme in the opposite end. The absence of enforcement, like I said, I was dealing with these companies. Never was a raid. Never was anybody worried about a raid. Never instructions in case the ICE shows up. What do you do? No one ever talked about this stuff. This never happened. Yet it's not like there's a couple mystery warehouses hanging around New Jersey. There was no enforcement whatsoever. ICE could have easily came in there and taken all these people out and fined all these major brands just like that, but no one ever did. So we've had the extreme in the opposite position, and so the only resolution is going to have to be the extreme in the other position. And it's not a fair situation, but no one's been treated fairly either. I think for the other compassionate part about this is that I'll give you another example. I have a friend of mine who lives in Los Angeles, and she talks all the time. People do not understand how influential the cartel is when it comes to the illegal immigrants who are here, not just trafficking them in, who are here. They owe them money, they extort them. The guys who have those food trucks driving around LA, guess what? They owe the cartel money. If they don't pay them, they're going to threaten their lives, kidnap family back in Mexico, do whatever,
Mhm.
right? Um, these people who are coming across being told you get the American dream, women are sold into sex slavery, children are sold in sex slavery too, being abused, killed. Like we have an entire industry of trafficking, all for the pursuit of cheap labor. And and so like there are multiple facets to this. It's been a black market system of labor, all so somebody can save a few bucks.
Do you think
And
things will, like,
yeah,
I completely understand the argument, it makes sense to me. Do you think that, because I keep hearing, if that's not, that system is no longer in place, there's going to be this collapse in the US. Do you think if Trump goes and he, like, goes super hardcore on this, ICEs everyone out of the country, um, will there be a collapse?
no. And the reason I don't believe there would be a collapse is because one, there are plenty of Americans who are actually looking for work. Everyone always thinks about like the city dwellers, the white collar workers. But there are a lot of people who are from rural America who lost everything. Their jobs were lost to foreigners by sending their jobs overseas. And then they have to deal with people who are coming from other countries to do the jobs that they're trying to do. And so I don't know if you've noticed this while living here, how many people like in Los Angeles or New York aren't from Los Angeles or New York, right?
Quite a
It's
few.
it's just the place that has the jobs. And why is that the case? It's because everywhere else the economy has been kind of decimated. And so even for me living in New Jersey, I'm very fortunate to actually where I live at. Because if I lived in certain parts of Ohio, like jobs are scarce, or parts of Michigan,
Mhm.
maybe you can get a job in a union, but those jobs are dwindling and they're
Mhm.
not secure. So there are parts of America that have been facing this challenge, whether jobs being shipped overseas or jobs being replaced, the factory jobs that people used to work for decades, pick and pack jobs, bakery, doing pastry stuff type of work. They used to do that stuff for decades. Grandparents used to do that. All of a sudden, Americans don't want to do that. Like that seems like a weird narrative. Do certain Americans not want to do it? Sure, right? The people who want to have a blue collar, a white collar life, but a lot of people need work. A lot of, especially in rural America. And I've lived, unlike most people who live like in one area most of their life. I've lived in 5 states in the United States. Um, and I've lived in urban, rural, and suburban areas. And so I have a very good sense as to what America is like, especially in different regions. And I'm just like, people are always looking for jobs. There are always people, someone may be coming out of jail and wants to start over and they want to, we have the largest prison incarceration. Like these people are eventually going to come out. Where's their opportunity? You know, so we have a lot of people who would, for damn sure, the same guy, the same landscaper I was telling you about in Mississippi, he was saying that they opened up an Amazon facility. He said, you know who works there? All the black people, right? Thank you so much for opening up this Amazon facility. We have a job now and with steady employment. Thank you. That's a huge thing out in rural Mississippi. Like, of
That's
course
a
there are people
general
who,
thing too. I think there's just been a lot of closures from exporting out into, China and then beyond that, and
yeah,
to the point where we don't know how to make things domestically. We don't have the infrastructure anymore, and and the quality of the products too. It's like, I mean, and China is getting better, it's climbing up in terms of its own economy, but we're still getting things that are lower quality. And part of that is the outsourcing, and part of that is also our consumerism, where we want things to be really cheap and kind of demand things to be cheap. But I know, like, the way my parents grew up, in a communist country, mind you, but but like it cost a lot of money to get quality things, like crazy amounts of money, right? It should never be like that. But people were willing to pay, multiple salaries worth for just like a good pair of jeans or something like that. Um,
right.
and obviously, jeans shouldn't cost that much, but the idea that things should just be dirt cheap, that comes at a cost. And I think part of that cost is that it got outsourced. So China's getting more expensive to make things in. So they're going to look for the new place. And again, there's no, and it destroyed, I think, the infrastructure in the US to create things and produce things and to be proud of quality. Quality has just deteriorated for
Yes.
most things. Again, it comes from this like consumerism where it's like everything is disposable. But now, even if you're like willing to pay a little bit more, you can't find the products to buy, certainly domestically. And then I think food, if you look at Europe, you have a lot of farming happening there and you have much higher quality food. But in the US and Canada, it's like not very high quality and there's a lot less farming going on. So I think bringing that back would be very helpful to both economy and us having higher quality goods and especially higher quality food.
Yeah. You know, it's very interesting going throughout the United States, where the US is almost like a continent on its own, right? And so there are a lot of things that we technically don't have to import. Um, but we've kind of gone on this service economy trip, import things, and it'll definitely be cheaper because we'll have some kid put it together in some third world country and ship it over here, and you'll get it real cheap at Walmart. But like, it was that necessary? Who did that actually benefit? Like, what did we do before? Was America suffering getting enough goods? No, but we just kind of accepted that Walmart's going to destroy Main Street, and that's just what it is. But at least you get this product for 20 cents cheaper than you would have before. Like it's that kind of belief that we have to have a global economy when the United States has something of value. And I think, and I have to preface by saying this, I'm not trying to be a Trump sycophant, but I think when I watched him speak uh, before the election, he was speaking in Chicago. It was because he usually does these rallies, but he was speaking about business. And after watching him speak about business and how his approach or his how he wants to approach things is very much so business oriented. After he was talking, I realized what he is talking about is when you run a business, you see your business, a successful person sees their business has a value. And what we've been watching is people who are part of the US government, whether it be politicians, bureaucrats, who don't see the value. in the United States, which is why they're just like, yeah, you take this, we'll just open this, you take that, we'll ship this in. And I don't think they see the value. It's like other people's money, right? You wouldn't give $50 million to these people to do this project, but you give other people money, to do these things. It's a different mindset. There is definitely like a government mindset because it's not yours. But when it's a business and you're the CEO of this business, if it fails, it goes under, it disappears.
But then I would argue that as a business person, I
Hmm.
would want to create a really high quality business, right? And I would
Right.
actually want to have the values that I believe in. So I would personally create things domestically. I would actually pay people better, maybe hire fewer people, but quality conditions. That's a reflection of me. But then you look at somebody like Trump, and he makes this stuff in China, and his argument would be, well, the legislation allows me to, which is true, it's fair enough, right? But
Hmm.
but to me, that represents that the belief isn't there. It's just you're going to do a lot, and a lot of businesses, not just him, but like a lot of people will, a lot of business owners will do whatever it takes to make the highest profit margins. They ultimately don't care about their brand, beyond, whatever the cost benefit ratio is. That there isn't like a pride in the brand. And then you have these very multinational brands on top of it where it's like it's not even a single owner, it's shareholders. So all they really care about is ultimately their pockets. So the whole incentive structure is set against being like a responsible brand owner, essentially. And the globalist nature, I mean, I'm not against, because I think there are certain things we might want to import from other countries. Like, um,
Absolutely.
I don't think based on it should be so much based on cost as it is like this is a unique thing that we're going to import. Like, I love French food. I'd love to import more European foods in general, or European fashion. The problem is that we have a situation where things are competing just on cost, not based on quality. Or yeah,
Yes.
it's kind of like cost versus merit in a way.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. Um, I guess what I'm more so getting at is when when and I'm not saying we should treat America like a business, but there are certain aspects of the private market that make sense that they utilize to keep it going. Um, and obviously there are greedy corporations. We were just talking about greedy corporations using illegal labor to save some money. So, but I'm specifically talking about how you envision something of value. And when you envision something of value, you don't give it away. It's much in the same way, like if you're selling your book, if you value your book, you'll price it, right? You wouldn't give it away for free, right? Even if you're like, oh, I don't care about money. No, but you don't give it away for free because it gives the impression that you don't value it.
Yeah.
Um, and so what I'm seeing is people within the federal government who are just using it like a piggy bank because they don't value what happens after they're gone. They don't value it as a country. Like, all right, if in my term, yeah, I'm here for 4 years, and guess what? The budget increased by $500 billion. Well, I'm no longer in office. Adios. Like,
I think that is true. I mean, I think the term, I mean, people don't generally think about politicians when I speak of people. No, they're not people, they're politicians. Politicians, some of them eat with people, but they're still politicians. No, they're not going to, they don't tend to care in the long term. And
right,
I'm a fan of term limits because it's a good balance, a good check to have. But at the same time, when you have leadership that it only knows that it's going to stick around a certain amount of time, they don't tend to think of longevity of their ideas. So they'll implement
yeah,
whatever is going to be most popular in the moment, and in 20 years that's somebody else's problem. That's I don't know how to navigate around that, to be honest, beyond having a better class of politicians who care a little bit more about
Yeah,
long term as opposed to their personal gain. But, we can all dream, I guess, because I don't think, you know, I
yeah.
find that our politicians are, I don't know if it's like we get what we deserve, or I just think good people don't tend to want to go into politics.
Um, well, this is a very good topic. I don't want to keep you forever, but I will say this: after meeting one of my really good friends, technically a politician because she ran for office, um, for Congress, I started understanding the good people with really good intentions get they get driven out, right? Or they don't have enough money. Um,
Or
and
they change.
it's less that. I think
Mm.
it's less that. I'm just saying, like from the very beginning, because you have to campaign your ass off and you need to raise money. And a lot of good people don't want to beg people for money. I know. My wife says you should run for office. I'm like, I don't want to do any of that shit. I don't want to
Yeah.
beg anybody for money. I don't want to call and say, let's have this meeting. I don't want to do any of that stuff. Some people are just built for it, right? And so if you don't have certain connections, if you're the new kid on the block, there's the people who have been part of the local party who are not going to support you. They want to support their guy who's connected to this person. So everything about it is highly, highly political. It's not fun whatsoever. It's a massive risk if you're just a normal person who's not connected into politics. It's a massive risk. And then on top of that, it becomes one of those things where what's the personality type of someone who wants to seek power? And more often than not, it's not always the best person to get it.
Yeah.
So these are the issues that we face, and there is a lot of behind the scenes gatekeeping with the same type of people who are attracted to power, even if they have like pseudo power, like they're the committee member. They don't do anything, right? But they get to say, I'm a committee member, right? Um, and those people really love titles and power and all this other stuff. And they prevent good people. Like if I was to want to get into politics and I was wanting to run for office and I was to win, getting into that seat wouldn't change my character. I think more often than not, your character is your character.
You know why I said character is because, or they change, is because what I found is, so I had a very short-lived experience in politics when I was really young, and
Hmm.
what I saw was like if you agree with the party leadership long enough, you have to comply in the beginning of your political career, right? So if I had
Right.
complied, I would be elevated. That's how I'd grow. And at that point, you compromise so much to grow within the party that you lose who you were. And I have sort of seen that, and I saw that as being like I resigned in protest of a policy, so I didn't stick around even remotely long enough for that. Um,
Mhm.
but the people who do, and maybe you're right, they didn't have like full adherence to the principles that they claim to. But I have seen people who might have started out as being like kind of into it because they wanted to make a positive change, and then just by the nature of the beast itself have transformed because they sold out so much over little by little over time. So I see
Yeah.
a lot of those kinds of people. And yeah, I mean, but saying that, I do plan to run for Prime Minister of Canada. Just letting you know about my official candidacy. No, but that's also the frustrating thing because I know like if I ever wanted to run, I wouldn't really want to run as one of the parties. I would want to run as an independent, and there's zero way of winning. And it's the same in the U.S. where it's like
Yeah.
the only way you can really win is you have to be backed by these large machines. And those large machines have very specific demands. And you might be somebody who's like, yeah, I want to make some good changes, I'm like you might have your heart in it for the right reasons, but it's like, okay, well, to make these changes, I need to play ball a little bit, right? And again,
Hmm.
I think you lose, I think a lot of times it either dissuades good people from joining in the first place, or it changes people, or the only people who are seeking it are power hungry monsters. And I think I wish there was a way to change that. You know, there was Zelensky was on a TV series before he became president.
Yeah.
I forget, do you know, I forget the name of it, but he's like a school teacher who wins the lottery to become president. Like it's something like that. Actually, people do vote for him, but it's like it's almost like a mishap. It's almost like winning it, and he's the most unlikely person to become president in this like very corrupt landscape. And there was something really lovely about somebody who's just a school teacher
Hmm.
becoming who hasn't had a life of politics. That was a pretty good show, actually, pretty entertaining.
Hmm. Well, this has been a really good conversation.
Likewise,
Um,
thank you.
and I don't want to keep you too long. This has been a great first time on Substack Live.
I'm glad to be
Steve,
your first. I mean, on
yes.
Substack. That came out funny. I didn't even mean it that way, but then it just came out really awkward. I'm really good at making things awkward. It's my fault. I will not apologize though,
Don't
because
apologize.
yeah, my
Um,
my book's no apologies, so I can't
no
apologize.
apologies.
Yeah, I think I'm doing
Um,
a t-shirt, the no apologies t-shirt.
by the way, when are you, or have you started back up your podcast or?
Not yet, but hopefully soon. I've had like a random episode, but it's not like an official episode on there, but I hope to restart it, yeah, soon, hopefully. But yeah,
Okay.
I'm enjoying this. I'm glad we got this is my first day doing live as well, so um, I'm glad we got to try this out together, and hopefully didn't bore anybody too much. And you gave me some food for thought. Actually, there was a few things where I'm like, oh, I haven't looked at it that way. So there were
Yeah.
compelling arguments. Definitely good
Yes.
faith.
So I won the debate. No,
Yeah. Oh, see, you were trying, but you kind
I
of
won.
did a little. You did
Yeah.
a little bit.
Look,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you brought in some good arguments, so definitely things for
good.
me to reflect on. And if I can't disprove them, then I'll follow them and preach them to the
Yeah.
masses.
Likewise. Likewise. I had to tell someone, I'm not just some, and granted, there are a lot of uh, overnight subject matter experts who are, we have aviation experts all of a sudden now
Hmm.
since the that crash. Um, like the stuff I talk about is stuff that I feel very comfortable talking about because I'm very passionate about, and I have lots of life experience. I talk to people all the time, and so it's not just like I think this because I read this on Google somewhere real quick. I think this because I've thought about it deeply. I've talked to people who know more than me. You know, I get
Very
different
important.
perspectives. It's that kind of thing. So, and I've been, especially when it comes to legal immigration, I've just been by chance working alongside this particular industry and seeing it and how it operates,
And
which a
that
lot,
was what I found very interesting because I wasn't aware of that, and so to me it gave me a lot of thoughts in terms of that. And my qualification to speak on this is nothing. I'm a legal immigrant, technically, so I am a legal one, which I find that legal immigrants tend to be the hardest on the illegal immigrants because we had to go through so much. And I'm probably a little more lenient because it's my parents who really had to, do most of the hard work and apply
yeah,
based on merit. And it's not easy, and it's not
no,
easy when I tried to do it for the U.S. It's like it's very difficult, and I don't think people quite fully appreciate how difficult it is. And I think sometimes when you're somebody who's a legal immigrant or trying to do it the right way, there is a little bit of a bitterness because you're like, well, I did all the right things and I couldn't, it was a struggle. And then, there's this second system that just lets people in. But I think it's really complicated in terms of like people's motivations and reasons. And I think you can have empathy for the people and their circumstances that led them to this and still
Yeah,
think that there should be some laws around that that are enforced. So,
absolutely,
well, I
absolutely.
appreciate the conversation and, we'll do another one soon, I hope.
Yeah, I hope so too. And for everyone who stuck with us or watching this on replay, thank you. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Um, and after this, I will tell Catherine how wrong she is and how I own the lib. Uh, um, and also check out XXXY. They help support me. You can go to, I think was it xx-xyathletics.com/Adam
Just
to
be
get
really
your apparel.
careful, don't add the other X.
Yeah,
Just make sure
that is
there's only
very true.
two chromosomes.
That's right. But yeah, we'll end it here. Thank you guys so much. Have a good night. Peace.
Bye.